if the war were to end, he says he wants guarantees of security.
We'll see what that means. I think when the war ends, one thing he was very strong about, if it ends, he wants it to end. And that's President Putin said that. He wants it to end. He doesn't want to end it and then go back to fighting 6 months later. We talked about the possibility, I mentioned it, of a ceasefire so we can stop the killing. And I think we'll probably end up at some point getting a ceasefire.
President Donald Trump believes that Russia and Ukraine are inching closer to a possible peace deal, and he is willing to step out of conventional methods of securing an end to the bloodshed in a war that started nearly 3 years ago in February of 2022. Now, one thing that Trump has done that former President Joe Biden was unwilling to do or even consider was have a private phone call and discussion with Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia, without Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky involved. Now, he called Putin specifically to negotiate the possibility of a peace deal. And it's also pretty clear that Trump's diplomatic relationship with Putin also had something to do with the fact that Russia was willing to release an American by the name of Mark Fogel. Fogel was a middle school teacher who was in Russia at the time that he was jailed. Now, this is back in 2021, and he was facing drug charges. He was eventually sentenced to 15 years in prison for marijuana possession. And luckily, Donald Trump was able to secure a release for Mark Fogel. And look, the idea of someone spending 15 years in prison for marijuana possession is laughable to say the least. But Cenk, before I get to the details of what Volodymyr Zelensky is saying and what the likelihood of this peace deal is, I'm curious what you have to say.
Yeah, there's some significant downsides here. And Pete Hegseth said something he should not have said. And then Trump backed him up when he should not have backed him up. And I like that brother came home, but we paid a serious price for it. And I'm a little worried about that price. We'll explain all that in a minute.
So Volodymyr Zelensky, president of Ukraine, is not at all pleased with the fact that Donald Trump was willing to have a phone call directly with Vladimir Putin. And he argues that if they negotiated something without Ukraine present, I am unwilling to accept whatever the terms of that negotiation happens to be. In fact, let me give you his statement verbatim. He says, "We cannot accept it as an independent country, any agreements made without us. I articulate this very clearly to our partners. Any bilateral negotiations about Ukraine, not on other topics, but any bilateral talks about Ukraine without us, we will not accept." Now, the Ukrainian president does have some leverage in these peace talks, in these negotiations. For instance, Kyiv had hoped it would convince Donald Trump to work out a common position on bringing Russia to the table to negotiate a peace deal, and had offered access to its reserves of rare earth metals in return for US support. And namely, the Ukrainians are concerned that the United States, under the leadership of Donald Trump, will essentially back out of its security guarantees for Ukraine. And some of the messaging that we've heard from the Trump administration and Pete Hegseth so far does make it appear as though the US is going to kind of back off providing, direct security and support to Ukraine. And we're going to get to what Hegseth had to say in just a minute. Some Ukrainian soldiers, though, are welcoming the negotiations between Putin and Trump. One soldier from Ukraine's 53rd Brigade, fighting in the eastern Donetsk region, specifically told the Associated Press that she felt that it was actually normal and a good thing for Trump and Putin to speak to each other one-on-one. Let me give you the direct statement. "If dialogue is one way to influence the situation, then let them talk, but let it be meaningful enough for us to feel the results of those talks," the soldier said, insisting on anonymity due to security risks for her family in occupied Ukrainian territory. There are even some dates that are being considered for a ceasefire. The Financial Times reports that senior Ukrainian and Western officials said Trump and Putin would probably try to secure a ceasefire by one of two significant upcoming dates. Easter, which is the Orthodox and Catholic churches, will both celebrate on April 20th this year, or May 9th when Russia celebrates the Soviet victory over Nazi Germany. Putin will want a deal on a notable day like this, according to a Ukrainian official. But there are some significant demands coming from Russia that do seem a bit unreasonable. So Moscow is demanding that Ukraine cede control over 4 southeastern regions, none of which Russia fully controls, and expects the West to lift all sanctions imposed since 2014. Also, Putin told Trump that he wanted to settle the reasons for the conflict, indicating that Russia had not dropped its goal of stopping Ukraine's ambition to join the West and rolling back the post-Cold War security order. So this obviously has to do with NATO. Now, in regard to NATO, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth weighed in on that during a meeting with European allies at the NATO headquarters in Brussels. Let's hear what he had to say.
We want, like you, a sovereign and prosperous Ukraine. But we must start by recognizing that returning to Ukraine's pre-2014 borders is an unrealistic objective. Chasing this illusionary goal will only prolong the war and cause more suffering. The United States does not believe that NATO membership for Ukraine is a realistic outcome of a negotiated settlement. Instead, any security guarantee must be backed by capable European and non-European troops. If these troops are deployed as peacekeepers to Ukraine at any point, they should be deployed as part of a non-NATO mission, and they should not be covered under Article 5. To be clear, as part of any security guarantee, there will not be U.S. troops deployed to Ukraine.
Now, interestingly enough, while Pete Hegseth clearly threw cold water on the notion of Ukraine joining NATO, Bill Taylor, who was the former US ambassador to Ukraine under Bush and Obama, says that it's not necessarily off the table. So I want to go to what he had to say about it, and then I'll go back to you, Cenk, to get comment on it.
No one wants to reward Putin for illegally invading a sovereign nation. You can listen very carefully, though, to what the defense secretary said. He said that NATO membership would not be part of this discussion, these negotiations. Of course not. Of course, we're not going to negotiate Ukraine's membership in NATO with the Russians. That will never happen. So the secretary is exactly right. That's not part of this negotiation. That will be separate. That will be a decision for the Ukrainians and NATO.
So, Cenk, I'm curious what you think about what Bill Taylor had to say and what his interpretation is of Pete Hegseth's statement. Do you think that there's a possibility that they might negotiate Ukraine joining NATO after they negotiate a peace deal?
I think that's a lot less likely, but let's break it down, the whole thing. So first of all, Trump is making an effort at peace. Is that a good thing? Yes, that's a good thing. Biden didn't even really try, and the reason for that is not his general incompetence and the fact that he had dementia and hence barely did anything. It's because he didn't want peace. The intelligence agencies and national security interests in America wanted to bleed Russia dry. And they've kind of been using Ukraine to do that. So Russia's military is depleted, their economy is in tatters. So American national security folks, thinking in the old school way, oh, that's great. They're now weaker, we're stronger. So they didn't really want peace, let's be honest about it. They never made an effort towards peace. In fact, they helped scuttle peace talks with Boris Johnson in the past. So now that doesn't mean that Biden is at fault for the invasion. Russia did the invasion, they're responsible for it, they're at fault. Okay, now Trump, when he first came in, didn't immediately give away Ukraine to Russia, the provinces that Russia already is occupying. And I was pleasantly surprised by that. I thought he'd just give it to Putin right away, but I had a super low bar, right? So now we're back to kind of giving away the store, if you ask me. But there are nuances, as the ambassador points out. So first off, everybody's outraged that Trump and Putin are meeting by themselves without Zelensky or the Europeans, and this is a big breach of protocol and totally unacceptable. No, if you remember, I was super concerned and continue to be concerned when Trump and Putin meet. but Trump rips up the notes of that meeting afterwards and does not allow American translators in. That's mental. There's no reason for that at all unless you're doing something wrong and in your own personal interest. But just meeting with a foreign leader that is an adversary in a lot of ways, there's nothing wrong with that. So they say, oh, well, Zelensky should be involved. Yeah, in the final negotiations, of course Zelensky should be involved. Of course Ukraine should be involved, but this is not necessarily final negotiations. And for me, I always believe in talking to the other side in peace. So whether it's Israel saying, oh, I'll never talk to Palestinians because of Hamas, or Dick Cheney saying we won't talk to Iran because we don't speak to evil, they're all absurdities. So no, nothing wrong with Trump and Putin talking as long as somewhere we have the notes of what happened. Okay, but the real problem here, and there's a couple of folks here. See, Ali Kollega, he's one of our members on YouTube. Hit the join button below and become part of the show. Wrote in everything to appease Putin. That's why he was willing to meet without Zelensky. Maybe, brother, maybe it is appeasement. And I don't want to say that lightly. It really might be. But on the other hand, a conversation is not the end of anything. It's the beginning of something. So when they actually get to the policy, that's when we should either be elated or mad or somewhere in between. So that's where my issues are. I'm going to give you one member now from tyt.com. Don't shoot on the goalkeeper says any quote unquote peace deal that involves Ukraine giving up land isn't worth the paper the deal is printed on. It's not Russia's land to steal. Now look, I hear you, brother. It's not Russia's land to steal. But at this point, Russia has it, and we have to get to peace somehow. And I don't know a great answer. In fact, I don't know anybody that has a great answer to that. So how do we get to peace while getting Russia to leave? It's a nearly impossible task. So for example, you see how upset I get at Israel over Gaza, right? But the Palestinians desperately want, it's one of the central demands, is right of return from 1948. For everybody who was kicked out in 1948 to go be able to return to Israel, vote in Israel, etc. Israel's never, ever going to agree to that. It will end every peace deal. So as incredibly painful as that is, they have to give up right of return to get to a peace deal. So we have to do something painful, but I don't know what it is. So what's my criticism of Trump and Hegseth? Well, brother, if you say Russia's gonna get the land they're occupying now and Ukraine isn't going in NATO, what leverage do you have left? I mean, those are the two massive issues. And maybe you make a trade there, but if you preemptively give away both of them before the negotiations begin, well then what are the negotiations about? That is kind of a preemptive surrender to Russia. So Hegseth walked it back a little bit and then Trump then re-walked it in. So it was just a disaster in my opinion on those grounds. So Anna, that's why I think that the actual substance of these talks not off to a great start.
Yeah, I mean, look, I hear what you're saying, but let's also just address the elephant in the room. Russia has been winning this war. They have managed to take more territory, Ukrainian territory specifically, obviously. Ukraine thinks that they have leverage because they've managed to occupy like a tiny, tiny bit of Russia's land. But when push comes to shove, Russia is winning this war, and a lot of people have died. There are Ukrainians who are being forced to fight in this war who do not want to fight in the war. They're now literally asking, pretty old individuals in Ukraine to fight to defend the Ukrainian territory, and they keep getting killed. And so I hear what you guys are saying in regard to the unfairness of allowing Russia to, illegally invade a sovereign country and then essentially get what they want in taking over some of the Ukrainian territory. But there's no indication that Ukraine is going to win this war. And the idea that US taxpayers should keep shelling out hundreds of billions of dollars in military weaponry to Ukraine, and just so they can continue losing more territory, also doesn't make much sense to me. Yeah. And look, the one thing I will say is, Donald Trump actually does have some leverage over Russia. So we don't know what the end of this, what the terms are gonna be in the end. But I do wanna go back to former US Ambassador to Ukraine, Bill Taylor, because he kind of notes the leverage that Donald Trump has and how Trump is willing to cite that leverage as part of these negotiations. Take a look at that.
President Trump does have leverage over President Putin, and President Putin understands that. President Putin's economy is fragile. President Trump referred to that. President Putin is ruling his country. President Trump referred to that. So this is an indication that President Trump does have the capability to bring Putin to the table and make a deal with the Ukrainians. The last thing on the business about not taking back all of the 1991 borders by force, this is also what President Zelensky has already said. He has said he's willing to stop the hot portion of this war and not try militarily to take back all the territory to 1991 borders. And he's willing to do that negotiating. He's willing to do that diplomatically. He, though, this is an important point, Kristen, that is President Zelensky will never recognize, nor should the rest of the world ever recognize the Russians' illegal annexation of that part of Ukraine, that 18% of Ukraine that Putin now occupies.
So just for comedy's sake, I have to juxtapose Bill Taylor's optimistic outlook and clear urge of going toward a peace deal with this image of John Bolton, a notable warmonger. I just love the photo of him that they use for this thumbnail, and the title's perfect. Trump has effectively surrendered to Putin. I mean, look, honestly, even if Russia was willing to let go of 10% of the Ukrainian territory that they're now occupying, it still wouldn't be good enough for Bolton, anything to continue the war. So look, I think that the right solution is somewhere in the middle. Obviously, don't give Russia everything they want. They do need to sacrifice something as part of these peace negotiations. The idea that they don't have to sacrifice a damn thing is also incredibly unjust. But Ukraine also has to acknowledge they are losing this war. It is not fair to US taxpayers to foot the bill for this war. And they need to sacrifice, they need to compromise just like Russia needs to. We need to meet in the middle and find a peace negotiation that's fair to both sides, or as fair as it can be.
Yeah, so look, I'll take Bill Taylor over John Bolton any day of the week. But I think he is being a little bit unrealistic in some ways. So he says, well, we might let them into NATO later, but Trump just gave a speech at the White House where he said the problem was that Biden said he'd let them into NATO, and that's part of why Russia invaded. And Biden said that minor incursion might be okay, which, by the way, was a massive mistake by Biden. That is true. Okay, so Trump has made it clear, no, he doesn't think Ukraine should go into NATO, and that he thinks if you let him into NATO, that it would cause more conflict and war. So it seems like that ship has sailed. So look, a lot of you are writing in saying it's so fundamentally unfair. You are right. Russia,
it is unfair.
Yeah, it's an enormous, gross injustice. Russia going into Ukraine, taking land by force, it's imperial, it's colonial, it's every bad word there is. It's totally unacceptable. Now, having said that, guys, I always look for constructive solutions. Again, using the Israel-Gaza example, whenever anybody asks, nobody has any solutions, but I do, and I explain, and some others do, like Rula Jabril actually did a wonderful job the other night on cable news explaining it. The Arab League has proposed something that is totally workable, where the Palestinian Authority would take over Gaza Strip, the Arab states would pay for the reconstruction, etc. In this case, I have to be honest, I haven't heard one person give a constructive solution as to how Ukraine could get that land back and Russia would be okay with it and we could end the war and get to peace. If one exists, I would love it. So if you're a member on tyt.com or YouTube, write in, tell me if you have one that I haven't heard of. If you're watching the show live, which you should every weekday, 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern, write it in the chat, etc. But as far as I've seen, that solution does not exist. So we've got to deal with super uncomfortable realities. And yes, an injustice that Russia might get away with to some degree. And Anna, I hear what you're saying about the US taxpayers, and it is a burden on us, and we keep carrying the burden. And so when Hegseth and Trump talk about, wait, NATO should pay, the European countries should pay into NATO at least their fair share, and maybe even more because we're defending them. We're paying a lot of money to defend them. I want to defend them, but I think they're right. They should pay their fair share, and maybe even a little more, right? Now, having said that, I hate that they preemptively gave away these, terms that are so important in this negotiation. So I think they've so far on day one, they've bungled the negotiations. But I don't know how to get to peace and still have justice for Ukraine. I wish we had that answer, but I don't think we do. And so back to the US taxpayers, if I thought that answer existed, could I say, okay, all right, maybe we pay another 10 billion, 20 billion, 100 billion, as long as I think we're actually going to get the land back for Ukraine, and not just for justice for Ukraine, but as a precedent to the rest of the world that you can't get away with that kind of aggression. That precedent is so important. Yes, I probably would pay that. Unfortunately, I'm not sure if we spent 100 billion or $1 trillion that we could accomplish that mission. So if we can't accomplish the mission no matter what, then we have to get to a point where, unfortunately, we have to get more realistic about how to get to peace. That's super painful, guys. And whenever you're doing negotiations for peace, both sides lose things that they do not want to lose. And unfortunately, sometimes the aggressor gets rewarded for their aggression, and I hate that. I hate it. But tell me how we fix it. So far, literally no one in power has said any suggestion that would work. And I want to just come back to the hostage for 1 second. Mark Fogel was basically a hostage that the Russians took. And they had a purpose in taking it. Now they're returning him. They're going to return one more guy. Belarus is going to return 3 guys. So what are the Russians getting in return? And this is what I'm worried about. They're getting, it looks like Alexander Vinnik, who is a cryptocurrency money launderer. Now that rewards them taking hostages. I think that if you go to Russia and you're an American citizen, you should have your head examined. They're going to kidnap you and trade you for their money launderers and their spies, okay? So I hate rewarding that kind of terrible behavior. Having said that, the other part of this that is extra bothersome is that here we go again, another cryptocurrency money launderer that's set free. The SEC and the FBI have had their cryptocurrency regulators and cops taken off the beat. So for some of those crypto guys, this might be a win-win. Oh, we get one of our money launderers back, and Russia wins. So again, so painful. I want Mark Fogel back. I want those hostages back, but that price is a heavy price we're paying.
Yeah, it is a heavy price. I think I would have made that deal. We got to get our Americans back. I mean, Biden had effectively abandoned him entirely, ended any and all conversations with Russia, and to abandon an American citizen who's being held hostage by a foreign government is unacceptable. But to be fair to Biden, he had a lot of experience with that.
Damn.
Whether it's in Russia or in Gaza, it doesn't matter. Doesn't matter.
Yeah, I mean, look, he was in a lot of ways asleep at the wheel. So if you're frustrated that they took this guy on your watch, which they did, and you don't want to give back this money launderer, I hear you. But you've got to make some sort of effort to bring the guy back. Offer something else, have a negotiation, offer not just carrots but sticks, but do something. And that's why Trump right now is actually still relatively popular with the American people, because unlike Biden, they see him, whether it's for good or bad, and a lot of it is for bad, but they see him taking action, whereas Biden just coasted for so long. Thanks for watching the Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.